Asked Nick what he thought. What could his father have done? But Nick had no answer. Not at a dinner, maybe not ever. Maybe there was nothing Rob could do.
Shocking. What really happened inside Rob Reiner's picture-perfect Brentwood mansion wasn't just a tragedy, it was a slow, silent collapse hidden behind fame, money, and smiles. While Hollywood was distracted by headlines, the real story stayed buried in fear, unanswered 911 calls, and a family breaking apart behind closed gates. And once you hear this, you'll realize almost nothing was what it seemed. Nearly 3 weeks after the devastating incident involving Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Reiner sent shockwaves through Hollywood, the surface-level headlines still don't come close to the truth. Because when you strip away the flashing news banners and celebrity speculation, what emerges is something far darker, quieter, and more unsettling: a family living for years under a pressure no one outside the gates could see. According to reports and investigative timelines, the moment that shattered everything didn't begin with police sirens or breaking news alerts. It began with silence. A silence so unnatural that even a routine weekly appointment, a massage therapist arriving that quiet Sunday afternoon, December 14th, 2025, felt wrong from the start. No answer at the gate. No response to calls. Just stillness. That silence triggered a chain reaction that would unravel the Reiner family forever. When Rob Reiner's daughter Romy Reiner rushed to the mansion after being contacted, she didn't expect horror. She expected confusion. Maybe a missed call. Maybe a simple misunderstanding. But when she opened that door, reality hit her like a wall. According to sources, she froze. She collapsed. She could not speak. And despite what early reports suggested, Romy did not make the 911 call. That crucial call, the one that set everything into motion, was made by the man who accompanied her that day, a trusted creative partner who stepped in when shock took over. This detail matters more than people realize, because trauma doesn't look logical. It looks like paralysis. And from that moment on, nothing about this story followed the version people thought they knew. And just when investigators believed they understood the scene, another revelation surfaced. As the investigation deepened, attention shifted to what had been happening long before that door was open: years of tension quietly building behind the walls of a multi-million-dollar Brentwood estate. On the outside, Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner represented Hollywood stability, respected careers, red carpet appearances, and a family that seemed unshakable. Inside, according to police records and people close to the family, the atmosphere was fragile. Welfare checks, noise complaints, mental health calls, incidents stretching back more than a decade. These weren't isolated moments. They were warnings. Repeated visits by law enforcement became an unspoken routine, each one handled discreetly, each one fading into silence afterward. Sources say the family lived in a constant cycle of hope and fear, especially surrounding their son Nick Reiner, whose struggles with mental illness and addiction were well known privately but rarely discussed publicly. Despite extensive treatment attempts, rehabs, doctors, structured support, things never fully stabilized. In the final months, according to close friends, Rob and Michelle confided something chilling: they were afraid. Afraid of what might happen. Afraid of what they could no longer control. Even so, they kept protecting, supporting, and believing. That belief, rooted in unconditional love, may have blinded them to how close everything was to collapse. And then came the night that now feels like a warning no one understood at the time. A public event. A holiday party. A son drifting through the room, disconnected, repeating a single unsettling question. The family left early, quietly, and within weeks, everything they feared became real. But the most painful part? The story didn't end there, it turned inward. As the reality of what had happened began to settle in, the focus of the entire investigation quietly but inevitably narrowed onto one person: Romy Reiner. Not because she was suspected of wrongdoing, but because in tragedies of this magnitude, proximity becomes everything. She lived nearby. She arrived first. She was the one who opened that door. And in the cold, procedural logic of any major investigation, those facts alone are enough to trigger intense scrutiny. What the public never truly understood was how psychologically devastating that moment was for her. According to people familiar with the scene, Romy did not walk through the house calmly. She did not search room to room. She barely crossed the threshold before her body shut down. When her eyes met her father lying motionless, Her nervous system went into full shock. She screamed, froze, and fled the house in a state of total disbelief. That's not weakness, that's trauma. Yet almost immediately, misinformation began spreading online, painting a picture that simply wasn't true. Headlines claimed Romy discovered both parents at once. Others insisted she personally called 911. Some even implied she behaved strangely. None of that aligned with the verified timeline. The truth, confirmed later by investigators and major outlets, was far more human and far more heartbreaking. Romy did not make the emergency call because she physically couldn't. Her brain was overloaded, flooded with terror and grief, incapable of performing basic tasks. Instead, it was the man who accompanied her that day, Alex Silberg, who recognized the severity of the moment and took action. That single detail, overlooked by many, became one of the most important pieces of the entire case. Alex Silberg was not some random friend who happened to be nearby. He was deeply connected to Romy's life creatively, emotionally, professionally. They had been collaborating closely on film projects, traveling together, building something that required trust and long hours. According to sources, they shared routines, creative rhythms, and a bond that had quietly grown stronger over time. Whether that bond was strictly professional or something more personal was never publicly defined, and frankly, it doesn't matter. What mattered was this: Romy trusted him completely. And on the worst day of her life, that trust became her lifeline. Alex didn't just call for help. He stayed. He grounded the timeline. He witnessed her reaction firsthand. He saw the panic, the collapse, the inability to process what was happening. In legal terms, that made him critical. In human terms, it made him essential. Because without a witness who could clearly articulate Romy's mental state in those moments, narratives could have twisted fast and dangerously. And that's exactly what almost happened. Within hours of the tragedy becoming public, speculation exploded. Social media moved faster than facts, and amateur detectives began constructing theories with zero context. Some people suggested Romy must have known more. Others twisted early police statements into false accusations. A particularly damaging rumor claimed she had directly implicated her brother, Nick Reiner, in the initial moments. That claim was flat out wrong. According to official reports later confirmed by multiple major publications, Romy never accused anyone. She did not point fingers. She did not speculate. What she did was provide basic information about the family's living situation, who lived on the property, where they stayed, and who might have been present. That's not blame. That's context. But in the chaos of breaking news, context got flattened into accusation, and accusation turned into clickbait. For Romy, this meant grieving not only the sudden loss of both parents, but also the brutal realization that her own words and even her silence were being weaponized by strangers who had never met her. Investigators, however, moved differently. They didn't operate on rumors. They operated on timelines, witness accounts, and physical evidence. Alex's presence helped establish a clear sequence of events when Romy arrived, what she saw, how she reacted, and how quickly emergency services were contacted. His statement corroborated her shock, her panic, and her inability to function normally in that moment. That clarity mattered more than people realize. In cases involving family members, especially adult children, suspicion can linger simply because emotions run high and relationships are complex. Alex's testimony helped eliminate ambiguity early, allowing investigators to focus on what truly mattered instead of chasing misleading narratives. Without him, Romy could have faced months or even years of lingering doubt in the public eye. Instead, law enforcement was able to rule her out quickly and decisively. But even with that relief, the emotional toll didn't disappear. As the investigation progressed, Romy learned the second blow, the one that shattered her completely. She hadn't seen her mother when she first entered the house. She only discovered that Michelle Reiner was also gone after police arrived. That meant Romy didn't experience one moment of loss, she experienced two, back to back, without time to process either. Psychologists call this compounded trauma, and it's one of the most destabilizing experiences a person can endure. Before her nervous system could even begin to regulate after seeing her father, it was hit again with the reality that her mother was gone too. That kind of emotional impact doesn't just hurt, it rewires you. And all of this unfolded while cameras hovered outside, while headlines refreshed by the minute, and while strangers debated her reactions from behind screens. Meanwhile, attention began shifting toward her brother, Nick Reiner. As police pieced together information, patterns from the past started resurfacing: previous welfare checks, domestic disturbance calls, mental health interventions. None of this was new to the family. They had lived with it for years. But now, every past incident was being re-examined under a harsher light. When Nick was eventually located and taken into custody later that evening, the emotional weight on Romy intensified in a way that's almost impossible to describe. In one single day, she lost both parents and the version of her brother she once knew. Love doesn't disappear when tragedy hits; it gets complicated. Grief becomes tangled with disbelief, loyalty with fear, and memory with horror. For Romy, that meant carrying two opposing truths at once: loving her brother and facing the possibility that he was responsible for the worst loss of her life. Through it all, Alex remained close. Not as a spokesperson, not as a public figure, but as someone who had seen the raw, unfiltered moment when everything collapsed. In the days that followed, sources say Romy leaned heavily on structure: projects, routines, movement, anything that gave her a sense of grounding. Nick, by contrast, appeared increasingly isolated, disconnected from social life, drifting further inward. That contrast between the siblings became stark. Two people raised in the same home, shaped by the same parents, now standing on completely different emotional ground. One trying to survive through motion, the other unraveling in silence. And as the legal process advanced, the question quietly shifted from what happened to how it could have ever reached this point. Because by now, one thing was undeniable: this was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow burn, a decade of warning signs, a family doing everything they could and still falling short. And as the case prepared to enter its next phase, the courtroom, the story was about to transform again. No longer just a tragedy, no longer just a family breakdown, but a full-scale legal battle that would force the world to confront one of the hardest questions of all: where does compassion end and responsibility begin? By the time the case entered its legal phase, it was no longer just a family tragedy. It had become a full-scale Hollywood courtroom reckoning, one where every past decision, every overlooked warning, and every quiet compromise was suddenly under a microscope. The arrest of Nick Reiner didn't bring closure. It cracked the story wide open. Prosecutors weren't just looking at what happened on December 14th, 2025. They were tracing a decade-long pattern of instability, interventions, and missed-turning points that had quietly shaped the outcome. Police records, once routine and forgettable, were now being re-examined line by line. Welfare checks dating back to 2013. Noise complaints dismissed as temporary disturbances. Mental health calls logged, resolved, and filed away. Each report on its own seemed manageable. Together, they painted a picture of a household living in a constant state of emotional alert, where love and fear coexisted uncomfortably under the same roof. Inside that Brentwood mansion, Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner had been navigating an impossible balance, protecting their son while trying to keep their family intact. And now, the legal system was asking the question no parent ever wants to face: at what point does protection become enabling? As Nick Reiner's defense team began preparing their strategy, one possibility loomed large: a not guilty by reason of insanity plea. It's one of the most controversial defenses in American law, especially in California, where juries are famously skeptical. To succeed, the defense must prove that at the time of the act, the defendant was unable to understand the nature of what they were doing or distinguish right from wrong due to a severe mental illness. According to sources familiar with the case, Nick's long-standing schizophrenia diagnosis, extensive treatment history, and recent medication changes became central to that argument. In the weeks leading up to the incident, doctors reportedly adjusted his antipsychotic prescription, hoping to stabilize him. Instead, people close to the family say his condition deteriorated rapidly. Mood swings intensified. Emotional detachment deepened. Moments of clarity became shorter and less frequent. Rob and Michelle, already exhausted from years of caregiving, felt like they were walking on glass. Every day carried the same quiet question: would today be the day things finally improved, or the day everything fell apart? Financial records and testimony added another layer. For years, Rob and Michelle had spared no expense in trying to help their son. High-end treatment facilities, continuous monitoring, a monthly allowance reportedly around $10,000, a separate guest house on the estate so Nick could have space without being fully disconnected. To outsiders, it might have looked like privilege. To the family, it was survival. They believed structure, support, and patience would eventually lead him back to stability. Friends say Rob, in particular, carried an immense sense of responsibility not just as a father, but as someone who believed deeply in redemption. He had spent his life telling stories about flawed people finding humanity. Living that belief, however, proved far more painful than writing it. And as prosecutors prepared their case, they faced a different challenge separating illness from accountability. They would likely argue that substance use, heroin, cocaine, meth played a significant role, potentially weakening an insanity defense. Addiction complicates everything. It blurs lines, clouds intent, and introduces questions juries struggle with. Was this illness? Was it choice? Or was it a collision of both? As the legal battle took shape, the emotional aftermath continued to ripple outward. Rob Reiner, still reeling from compounded trauma, now had to watch her family's private pain dissected publicly. Every court filing, every leaked detail reopened wounds she hadn't had time to heal. The loss of her parents was permanent. The loss of her brother, whether through incarceration or lifelong psychiatric confinement, felt inevitable. And yet, despite everything, those closest to her say Romy never turned her grief into anger. She didn't feed speculation. She didn't issue dramatic statements. She stayed quiet, focused on survival, leaning into work and routine as anchors in a world that no longer felt real. That restraint stood in stark contrast to the noise surrounding the case, where opinions multiplied faster than facts, and empathy often got lost in outrage. What makes this story resonate so deeply isn't just its Hollywood setting, it's how universal its core conflict is. Families across the country live with similar fears, minus the cameras and headlines. They love someone battling mental illness. They hope. They forgive. They try again and again, until one day, hope collides with reality in a way no one can undo. The Reiner family had resources most people don't, and still, it wasn't enough. That truth is uncomfortable. It forces society to confront the limits of money, fame, and even love when mental health systems fail to intervene decisively. Experts point out that schizophrenia, especially when combined with substance use, is one of the most difficult conditions to manage long-term. Medication adjustments can take weeks to stabilize. Relapses are common. Predictability is rare. For Rob and Michelle, each day was a calculated risk. They stayed because they loved. They believed because they had to. And that belief, however well-intentioned, may have delayed harder decisions that could have changed everything. As the next court date approaches, scheduled for early January, the stakes couldn't be higher. A successful insanity defense could mean Nick Reiner avoids prison entirely, instead being committed to a secure psychiatric facility potentially for life, or until deemed stable enough for supervised release. A rejection of that defense could result in decades behind bars. Either outcome carries its own kind of tragedy. There is no version of this story with a clean ending. No verdict will bring Rob and Michelle back. No sentence will restore what was lost inside that house. And for Romy, no ruling will erase the image of that moment when her world split into before and after. In the end, this case leaves behind questions that go far beyond guilt or innocence. How many warning signs are enough? How long can families be expected to carry burdens the system struggles to address? And when love becomes the very thing that keeps danger close, who is responsible for drawing the line? Rob Reiner spent his life believing in empathy, in understanding the human condition even at its darkest. His story now stands as a painful reminder that compassion without boundaries can be as dangerous as cruelty without conscience. As the courtroom doors prepare to open, the world will be watching for answers, but the truth may be that some stories aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be understood. And sometimes, understanding is the hardest verdict of all. This story isn't finished. The courtroom will decide facts, but the emotional truth is already written in loss, silence, and unanswered questions. Do you believe the system failed this family? Or did love without limits make the outcome inevitable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want the full breakdown as this case unfolds, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because this story isn't over, and neither is the truth.